World building is one of those things in writing that seems incredibly daunting. So this video will be about breaking it down step by step to make it feel manageable. I don't personally sit down and plan out every element of my world all at once. That would take forever. Instead, I think of it like a house. I build a solid foundation, and then I can fill it out with all the furnishings and such as I go. So I'll build a basis for my world, the rules on which all of it will be built, basically. And then as I write, I'll fill in all the little details. In this video, I'll be showing you how to build that foundation. On to the two halves of our foundation. Have them written down. So the first half is the world. This is the magic systems, planetary workings, etc. Things that are just baked into your world, like how long a day is or what the weather is like. And then the second half is the society. This includes the government, culture, religion, technology, factions, and history. All the things that go together to create the society that your characters live in. So basically you have the planet and then you have the people in the planet. Okay, so I'm just gonna, for this video, follow this process and create a universe that isn't from one of my stories. It's always hard when I do these and I want to use an example because I don't want to spoil a story of mine. So this will just be a new made-up world off the top of my head. No pressure, no biggie. Just using it as an example. Let's do this. Let's create a new society. Except we start with the world. We start with Foundation 1. So let's say that I'm creating a world for a fantasy story. I start with the world because that will have shaped the society. That means planetary workings and magic system. I group magic system in with the world because magic tends to be innate. It tends to just be baked into the way that life works. But you could put this in society if you prefer that method. I just tend to base my governments and my factions and all of that off of my magic systems often, so I like to have that before I start creating any characters. So for planetary workings, let's say that this is sort of like a temperate forest, rolling hills, classic fantasy location, you know. I'm gonna put it on an island to make this a smaller scale world building thing since this is just an example. So let's say we have an island and there's like a central volcano and there's the ocean around it and there's like the mountains around the volcano, forest off to the side, and some plains, grasslands off on the other side. That is our little universe that we are designing. For magic system, I will base it off something naturey. So there's going to be the magic of the sun, there's the magic of the moon, and those are the two magics. Most people are not born with magic, but maybe like every 1 in 10 little girls is born with magic. So now that I have a base location for the world and I understand the gist of the magic and how that functions, we can get on to fleshing the rest of it out. This is basically just giving us, like I said, the foundation to lay the foundations on top of. Now that we understand what the world looks like, we can move on to the society that exists within it. The reason I like to come up with the base rules of the world first is that often the location and also the magic system will be baked into how my society works, as I said. So it's good to understand how that works before I jump into this step. Now, next we decide the technology, government, factions, religion, culture, and history. So all of these elements, again, just lay out very basic. This is about building a foundation, and then as you write your story and you find yourself in need of details, so long as you understand the core building blocks of your society, of your magic system, you can just sort of fill in details and just note it for later so you don't forget and you don't end up like creating loopholes and plot holes. So technology, I'm gonna skip. I'm going like old fantasy, but if you're not going old fantasy, you would figure out like base technological levels. For example, in my sci-fi project Punk, when it came to technology, I was basically like, I'm gonna do futuristic technology, so that means like robotics, any sort of like cyberpunky sort of stuff that I wanted. But I did decide ahead of time, I was like, there's no artificial intelligence, that is not part of this universe yet. Everything is sort of like beat up and old. Most of the different societies are sort of like cut off from each other. It's like past their prime, you know? It's like technological marvels, but old and decrepit. The only real new, fresh technological innovation comes from this one company. And that was what I laid out. And that sort of determined who would have access to what technology and what technologies would show up. Like, I'm sure there's really impressive stuff that we're just never gonna see in my story because my story isn't about the richest people in the world, you know? It's about the people who are on the run from the government. Speaking of government, the next thing on my list is to decide the government. So I feel like the government is connected to magic system. I always love to do this. I always love to make the magic system tied into everything. So I'm going to say there's this one family, all of their daughters were born with magic. They like use that power and that infamy to slowly build up like a lot of sway. And so now I'm gonna say that there's multiple kingdoms. There's probably like a primary kingdom in the grasslands, okay? Because that's where there's lots of sun, you can grow lots of crops, that's where I'll be focusing on. So there's this family there, all of their daughters have sun magic, and the mother is sort of like the queen of this kingdom. Their whole goal is to just keep making sure that all their daughters continually born with sun magic. And I'm gonna say that they are not bad people, they're not like a bad ruling family, ruling house, but they can be. They appear to the public as like these bringers of light who go around and they make sure all the crops grow, but comes at a price of they get most of the crops, and they have a lot of control. They rule with a very firm fist, but it is not an unkind fist so long as you follow the rules. So that is the gist for the government. You are mostly left to do your thing so long as you follow the few rules that they have, and most people love them because they make the crops grow in the sunshine. Next, we decide the factions. Let's say that there's these people and then all the people who follow them, and then off in the woods there is sort of like the people with moon magic. Let's say that the people with sun magic, this royal family, sometimes other children will be born with sun magic or moon magic, and moon magic is looked down on and sun magic is seen as a blessing because you're like the royal family, and a lot of times you'll be brought in to work for the royal family. It's like a big deal. It's a big sign of like generosity from the gods that these people worship. But moon magic is like, oh, you are a dark thing of the night. Let's say most girls who are born with moon magic just stay living there and just don't use their powers, but a few of them have gone and live in the woods now under the tutelage of this ancient witch, because I love witches, and they have sort of like a little coven in the woods, and these girls want to basically just be allowed to practice their magic and do their thing, but the sun people don't like them because they're sure that they're plotting against them. And that's like our two main factions. And then let's say there's also, if you don't end up working for the royal family, a lot of girls with sun magic will go up into the mountains, and there's like a temple built on the side of this dormant volcano, and you can like live there and work there and be a cleric of the sun. And that's like the three main locations and factions on this place, okay? So again, like I said, we're just laying out very basics. I basically just take a group and I'm like, okay, what is your vibe? What's going on? Who lives here? Why do you live here? And what is your relationship with all the other places? I feel like the temple has no connection to the moon people in the woods. The temple has no connection to them. They're like, we don't even really know you exist, but they are really tied in with the royal family of the grasslands place. The grasslands place doesn't like the moon people. The moon people don't like the grasslands place, but they are peaceful, okay? So that's really what we're laying out. We're just laying out who is everywhere, why are they where they are, and how do they feel about the other people. Then religion. As I've been already laying out, I've sort of gotten vibes from all of these different groups. So I'm gonna say that the moon people, I'm gonna say they all sort of believe in the same gods. Like, let's say it's like a pantheon of like celestial deities, one for each planet, because these people are sun magic, moon magic, so they worship like the god of all the different planets, have one. And like big constellations and stuff. That's primarily the temples thing. So there's one for each of the different planets. If I were me, I'm not going to do this right now because that would be a really long video. Decide all the different planets and constellations that the sky has, and then just decide like a brief little thing. And you can draw inspiration. Like I'd probably be like, what different deities does Greek mythology have? And then I also would give them a symbol so that you can reference that later. I'll just give you an example. So let's say I'm going to create the sun god because that's the main one. So their symbol is probably like a very stylized sun, maybe over like sheafs of grain, like rays of light on sheafs of grain or something like that. Let's say, I'm not going to come up with a name right now, but let's say that they are the god of the sun, which also to these people means they are the god of life and bounty, the symbol of the ruling house. The temple belongs to them, and they are the most worshipped out of all of the different characters in this pantheon. Let's say that they are known for being kind and wise and often are depicted maybe like a chirping songbird. And so it's commonly good luck to wake to the sound of songbirds singing outside your window. That's considered a sign that you're going to have a good day and that you've been blessed by this deity. Then the culture. So the culture is sort of like an amalgamation of all of these things you've already been deciding. You're basically just creating a vibe. And then as you write the story, you slowly add little details. So like maybe I was writing the story and my character woke up and I was like, I want them to do something to do with their religion to introduce us to the fact that there is this sun god. So maybe I would have them take a small part of their breakfast and leave it on an altar by the front door with like a statue of like a little golden bird. You know, like then I would make sure to note in culture and religion that like that is a common thing. Like you have a little altar to the sun god in your household. This is basically just like figuring it out what the everyday life and way of being that your main characters and the world around them have. View it this way. The way that I view the culture in my world, you have your main character, right? And you have the whole society as a large that they have interacted with in their life. So the culture is how that society would react as if it was one giant person. As if the whole of every random character in your world is part of just one giant person that your character interacts with regularly. So for this example, I would have, let's say our main character is a moon magic girl, and she's still living in the grasslands, but eventually she will go and she will move to the woods and join this coven. If I was figuring out the culture, I would mostly be figuring out how I would interact with her. So she is a moon magic kid. We've already established they are not treated the same as sun magic girls. So maybe this character gets a lot of weird looks because it is sort of like she's just disliked by most people the moment they realize she has moon magic, because it is seen as like the sun looking away from you. The sun didn't even want you, or something like that. And you're just sort of laying out these little details until you create sort of pervading vibe of every NPC that you're going to run into. And that is sort of what I try to establish with my culture. Then finally, you have history. So history doesn't have to be super detailed. I know that when you're like, what is the history of your world? You're like, oh my goodness, do I have to write a book? Do I have to write a whole giant thing? Like I said, with this place, let's say, what are big events that matter in your world? The sun magic family, let's figure out how they came to power. You know, that's a history that will come up in your story. And you can also think about legends, big moments in your world's recent events or longer ago events that are going to affect the world today. You don't need to know what happened 5,000 years ago. You just need to know if something that happened 5,000 years ago is going to affect the story. And then all of these elements can be woven together to create a setting for your story. Think of the world as the foundation and the society as the house. Now you can furnish it with little details that you come up with as you go and as you write. I would probably be able to sit down and plot and write this story now because with my understanding of the basic building blocks, I would be able to flesh out any little details that I needed to as I wrote instead of having to sit down and churn out some gigantic like tome of a world building encyclopedia, basically. But because I have this foundation, any world building questions that I came up with as I was writing would tie back down to these foundations and these central pillars of the world that I've already created. Do keep in mind that with this all being said, I personally use pretty simple world building. You won't be catching me writing hard sci-fi anytime soon. And my stories tend to be more character driven than plot driven. So when I'm world building, I keep that in mind and I tailor it to that. I mostly focus on how my world will be interacting with my characters. It really depends on your preference, how much world building you want to do beforehand, but this is sort of what I do. I mostly just come up with the gist of the vibe of the world, and then I can fill in the little details as I go. And this is also why it's important to have a little document off to the side as you write, so that if you come up with something that's going to be referenced later, you can write it down so you don't forget. Through that process of slowly adding little details, you'll end up fleshing out a whole world document without you having to sit down and do that all before you get to write anything. I hope that this helped. Let me know in the comments if you have any questions, and I will link to a video up above which talks about 50 world building questions. Want to flesh things out a little bit more. And next week, I will have a video on how to plot your story. So I'm going to film that right now, and I will see you then.